My sister sued me for stealing her ideas. The judge asked for proof, and her lawyer quit on the spot. It sounds like the punchline to a bad joke, but for me, it was the moment my life split into a before and an after. Before, I had a sister. After, I had an enemy who knew all my childhood secrets. The ideas in question were not some abstract concept scribbled on a napkin. They were my life's work, tangible and real, sitting in my workshop under a thin layer of sawdust. I'm Lily, and I build custom furniture. Not the flat-pack stuff you fight with on a Saturday afternoon, but solid, handcrafted pieces made from reclaimed wood. Each one has a story. My sister sued me for my life's work, the judge demanded proof, and her lawyer quit. Now, I'm Lily, a furniture maker fighting for my creations. Subscribe and like to see how I reclaim my little tables from my enemy. My business, The Grain Story, started in my father's old garage. He was a carpenter, and the smell of cedar and pine is the closest thing I have to a memory of his hug. When he passed, he left me his tools and a small life insurance policy. My sister Ashley got an equal share. She spent hers on a 6-month trip through Europe, filling her Instagram with photos of cocktails in front of famous landmarks. I used mine to buy a commercial-grade table saw and a truckload of century-old barnwood from Ohio. For 2 years, I worked from dawn until my hands were too sore to grip a sander. I built my website myself, took my own photos, and hauled heavy tables to local craft fairs in my beat-up pickup truck. Ashley thought it was a cute hobby. "Oh, Lily's making her little tables again," she'd say at family dinners, a dismissive wave of her perfectly manicured hand. She never once set foot in the workshop. She never saw the splinters I had to pull from my palms or the nights I spent sketching designs until my eyes burned. She didn't care. But then, a feature in a major design magazine changed everything. Suddenly, The Grain Story wasn't a cute hobby anymore. It was a 6-figure business with a waiting list. My little tables were being shipped to clients in New York and California. That's when Ashley started remembering all the ideas she had supposedly given me. It started subtly. "You know, I always said you should use more walnut," she'd comment, despite the fact she couldn't tell walnut from plywood. Then it escalated. "I remember telling you about that leg design. It was my idea," she'd claim, pointing to a complex joint that took me a month to perfect. I tried to laugh it off, to placate her. I offered to bring her into the business, to teach her the ropes. "I don't want to get my hands dirty, Lily," she scoffed. "I'm the visionary. You're the labor. I just want my fair share of the profits from my intellectual property." That's when she said it. Intellectual property. The word sounded so alien coming from her lips. The lawsuit arrived on a rainy Tuesday, delivered by a courier who looked apologetic. It was a thick packet of lies, accusing me of fraud, unjust enrichment, and a dozen other legal terms that made my stomach churn. Ashley was demanding 50% of my business, retroactive to its founding. Her claim was that we had a verbal partnership agreement, that the entire concept was born from her creative genius during a brunch conversation in 2019, a conversation that never happened. I felt a cold, hollow space open up inside me. It was the space where my love for my sister used to be. That's what brought us to that courtroom. I sat there with my lawyer, David, a kind, older man who had been my father's friend. Ashley sat across the aisle looking smug in a designer suit I'm sure she couldn't afford. Her lawyer, a slick young guy named Tyler, presented their case with a flourish. He spoke of Ashley's brilliant, untapped creative mind and my opportunistic exploitation. I just sat there, clutching a folder of my original sketches, some dating back to high school, long before Ashley decided she was a design prodigy. When it was our turn, David didn't make a grand speech. He simply handed the judge my folder. Then he called me to the stand and asked me one question. "Lily, can you describe the process of creating the River's Edge coffee table?" I spent the next 10 minutes describing how I select the wood, how I mix the epoxy resin, the precise temperature controls needed, the 17-step sanding process. I spoke about the mortise and tenon joints I learned from my father. I could see Ashley's lawyer, Tyler, starting to shift uncomfortably. Then the judge turned to Ashley. "Ms. Ashley," he said, his voice calm but firm, "you claim these were your ideas. Can you please provide the court with any sketches, notes, emails, or any form of documentation that predates the founding of your sister's company?" Ashley's confident smile faltered. She looked at Tyler, who suddenly seemed very interested in a spot on the carpet. "Well, Your Honor," she began, "it was more of a conceptual collaboration. I was the muse." The judge stared at her, his expression unreadable. He then turned to her lawyer. "Counselor, do you have any actual evidence to support this claim? Anything at all?" Tyler stood up, straightened his tie, and cleared his throat. He looked at Ashley, then at the judge. "Your Honor," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "we have nothing." Then he picked up his briefcase, gave Ashley a look of pure disgust, and said, "I'm withdrawing as counsel, effective immediately." He walked out of the courtroom without a backward glance. But that moment of public humiliation wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of discovering what my sister was truly capable of. The silence in the courtroom after Tyler walked out was heavier than any slab of oak I'd ever lifted. It was a thick, suffocating silence, filled with Ashley's stunned humiliation and the judge's quiet disapproval. The judge dismissed the case without prejudice. A term David later explained meant Ashley couldn't sue me for the exact same thing again, but it didn't stop her from finding new ways to come after me. For a moment, I felt a wave of relief so powerful my knees went weak. It was over. But when I looked at my sister, I saw something in her eyes that chilled me to the bone. It wasn't sadness or remorse. It was pure, unrefined hatred. The lawsuit hadn't been the main event. It was just the opening act. I walked out into the hallway and David put a comforting hand on my shoulder. "That was a clean win, Lily," he said, his voice gentle. The truth came out. I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't shake the image of Ashley's face. "The truth doesn't matter to her, David," I whispered. This was never about ideas. It was about the fact that I built something and she didn't. We went for coffee afterwards, and I spent an hour just staring into my mug, the steam warming my face. I felt like I had run a marathon I never signed up for. All I wanted was to go back to my workshop, to the familiar smell of sawdust and wood stain, and forget this whole nightmare. That piece lasted for exactly 12 hours. The next morning, my phone started buzzing before my alarm even went off. It was a notification from Instagram, then another, and another. My heart sank. I opened the app, and the first thing I saw was Ashley's face. She had posted a video. She was sitting in a dimly lit room, her makeup streaked with tears, a single perfect teardrop rolling down her cheek on a loop. The caption read, "My story of betrayal. When your own family steals your dream." In the 10-minute video, she spun a masterful tale. She never mentioned the lawsuit she lost. Instead, she claimed I had used her vulnerable emotional state after our father's passing to coerce her into letting me handle the physical side of the business while she, the creative force, grieved. She painted me as a manipulative monster who, once the business became successful, used a high-powered corporate lawyer to intimidate her and push her out, leaving her with nothing. She even twisted the story of our inheritance. My investment in tools became hoarding the family legacy, while her trip to Europe was reframed as a journey to find artistic inspiration for our shared brand. It was brilliant in a sickening sort of way. She knew exactly which buttons to push. The comment section was a tidal wave of outrage on her behalf. "How could she do that to her own sister?" one person wrote. "Boycotting the grain story," wrote another. The feature in the design magazine, which had been my biggest triumph, was now being used as a weapon against me. People were tagging the magazine, demanding they retract the article about the thief carpenter. My business page was flooded. Orders were being canceled. Clients who had been on my waiting list for months were sending angry emails. I tried to respond, to post a statement with the facts, with the court documents proving the case was dismissed. But it was like trying to put out a forest fire with a water pistol. Ashley's narrative was emotional and simple. Mine was complicated and legal. In the court of public opinion, I had already been found guilty. I felt a helplessness I hadn't experienced since my father's funeral. I had built my entire life on the principle that solid, honest work speaks for itself. I was wrong. A well-told lie, it turned out, was louder than any truth. The worst part was the doubt that began to creep into the edges of my mind. Not about what happened, but about my ability to fight it. Ashley was attacking me in an arena I didn't understand. I knew how to join two pieces of wood so they would hold for a century. I had no idea how to fight a ghost. An idea. A lie that was spreading faster than I could type. A few days later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Frank, the old man who ran the salvage yard in Ohio, where I got most of my reclaimed barnwood. He was a man of few words, and his family had been in the lumber business for 3 generations. He had known my father. "Lily," he said, his voice gravelly. "I got a strange call today." My stomach tightened. "What kind of call, Frank?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "Some woman said she was your sister," he began. "Said she was a co-owner of your business. Told me you were under investigation for fraud, and that I should stop all shipments to you until it's cleared up. Said you've been using cheap, treated pine and passing it off as 100-year-old oak." I closed my eyes. This was a new level of attack. This wasn't just about my reputation anymore. This was about my supply chain, the very foundation of my work. Ashley wasn't just trying to hurt my feelings. She was trying to burn my business to the ground, one lie at a time. And she was starting with the very roots of it. I held the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. My entire business, my life's work, was built on 2 things: the quality of my craftsmanship and the authenticity of my materials. Ashley knew that. Attacking my wood supply wasn't just a business tactic. It was an attack on my very identity. "Frank," I said, my voice shaky but determined. "That's a lie. All of it. You know my father's work. You know my work. Have I ever given you a reason to doubt my integrity?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line, filled only with the faint crackle of a long-distance call. For a terrifying second, I thought Ashley's poison had worked. Then I heard Frank clear his throat. "Your father was the most honest man I ever knew," he said, his voice a low rumble. "He used to say, 'You can't build a straight table on a crooked foundation. The lie will always show in the final product.' I've seen your work, Lily. It's straight. Don't you worry about your shipments. You'll get your wood." I leaned against the cold wall of my workshop, a wave of relief washing over me. I thanked him, my voice thick with emotion, and hung up. One fire was out, but I could smell smoke everywhere. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, trying to work, but my hands felt clumsy and disconnected from my brain. Every buzz of my phone made me jump. I saw my Instagram followers dropping by the hundreds. The comment sections on my old posts were a war zone of accusations and arguments. My father's words echoed in my mind. Ashley was building her entire case on a crooked foundation, a web of lies. But in the digital world, it didn't seem to matter. Her emotional, tear-filled performance was more compelling than my quiet, solid truth. I called David again, my lawyer. I told him about Frank and the escalating attacks. He was sympathetic, but practical. "Slander and libel are hard to prove, Lily," he explained patiently, "especially when it's framed as personal opinion and emotional distress on social media. She's being clever. She's not accusing you of a specific crime online. She's just telling her story. It's insidious." He advised me to document everything, to save screenshots and record dates and times, but he warned me that another lawsuit would be costly and might only give her more ammunition for her victim narrative. I felt trapped. I had won in the court of law, but I was losing badly in the court of public opinion, and that was where my business lived or died. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my drafting table, surrounded by sketches for projects I no longer knew if I could complete. I felt a profound sense of loneliness. My father was gone. My sister, the only other person who shared my childhood memories, was actively trying to destroy me. My business, the thing that had given me purpose after my father's death, was crumbling. I buried my face in my hands, the rough calluses on my palms scraping against my forehead. It felt like I was being sanded down, layer by layer, until there would be nothing left. Just as I was about to give in to despair, my computer chimed with a new email notification. I almost ignored it, expecting another cancellation or a hate-filled message. But the subject line caught my eye. New commission inquiry. The Oak Project. My finger hovered over the delete button, but curiosity won. I opened it. The email was from a man named Andrew, a partner at a high-end architectural firm in Chicago. He wrote that he had seen the magazine feature and had been following my work for months. He wasn't deterred by the current online noise, as he called it. He said, "True craftsmanship has a clear voice that cuts through gossip. Your work speaks for itself." He wanted to commission a massive conference table and 20 matching chairs for their new headquarters. It was a project that would take me 6 months, a project bigger than anything I had ever done before. It was a corporate contract, the kind of job that could stabilize my business for a year, maybe more. It was a lifeline, a single clear voice of support in a sea of condemnation. For the first time in weeks, a tiny spark of hope ignited inside me. It wasn't just about the money. It was the validation. Someone saw the truth in the grain of the wood, not in the venom of a lie. I typed out a reply, my fingers flying across the keyboard, thanking him and agreeing to draft a proposal. I felt a surge of my old energy return. I would not let Ashley win. I would build this table. It would be the best thing I had ever made. It would be my answer to her lies, a testament to my work, solid and undeniable. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. I was heading to my workshop, proposal notes in hand, when I saw a city-issued car parked in front of my garage. A woman in a crisp uniform holding a clipboard was walking towards my door. She had a grim official look on her face. My heart sank. The attack had reached my doorstep. Ashley's war had just moved to a new front. The woman's name was Carol, and her identification badge said she was from the city's code enforcement department. She had a tired, practiced neutrality in her eyes that was more intimidating than open hostility. My hope from the Andrew email evaporated like morning mist. This was Ashley's next move, and it was brutally effective. "I'm here in response to an anonymous complaint," Carol said, her voice flat as she consulted her clipboard. "The report alleges the operation of a heavy industrial business in a residential zone, citing excessive noise, hazardous chemical fumes, and frequent commercial traffic." Every word was a poisoned dart. Excessive noise was the hum of my sander. Hazardous fumes was the faint, sweet smell of wood stain. Commercial traffic was Frank's lumber truck once every 2 months. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice even. "It's just me," I said, gesturing towards the garage. "I'm a furniture maker. It's my own business, run from my home." Carol just nodded, making a note. "I'll need to see the space, and your business license, zoning variance permits, and records for chemical waste disposal, specifically for epoxy resins and industrial solvents." My blood ran cold. Business license? I had one, registered to my home address. But zoning variance? Waste disposal records? I was an artist who had turned a passion into a business. I disposed of my waste responsibly, but I didn't have a manifest of official documents. I felt like a child being asked to produce a pilot's license after flying a paper airplane. I led her into the workshop, my sanctuary. The place that always felt safe and smelled like my father's memory now felt like a crime scene under a harsh fluorescent light. She walked through the space, her shoes clicking on the concrete floor. She didn't see the beautiful grain of the walnut slab waiting to become Andrew's conference table. She saw a fire hazard. She didn't see the tools my father had passed down to me. She saw ungrounded electrical equipment. She pointed her pen at a row of stain cans on a shelf. "All flammable materials need to be stored in a certified fireproof cabinet," she stated, not looking at me. "And this dust collection system isn't up to commercial code for this volume of particulate matter." I felt a wave of defensive anger. "This is my father's garage," I said, my voice tighter than I wanted. "I've worked here for years. I've never had a problem. I'm not hurting anyone." Carol finally looked at me, and for a second I saw a flicker of something that might have been sympathy, but it was gone as quickly as it came. "Ma'am, the rules are the rules," she said. "I don't make them. Based on what I see here, this is a commercial workshop operating in an R1 residential zone. I have no choice but to issue a notice." She tore a sheet from her clipboard. It was a cease and desist order. The words seemed to leap off the page and punch me in the stomach. I had 30 days to halt all commercial operations from the premises. 30 days. Andrew's project, my lifeline, was supposed to start next week. This order would make it impossible. I would lose the biggest contract of my life before it even began. What am I supposed to do? I whispered, the paper trembling in my hand. You can apply for a zoning variance, she said, already turning to leave. But it's a long, expensive process with no guarantee of approval. Or you can relocate your business to a properly zoned commercial or industrial space. She was at her car now. You have 30 days, Ms. Lilly. After that, we start issuing fines. They're $500 a day. She got into her car and drove away, leaving me standing there with a piece of paper that felt like a death sentence for the grain story. I stumbled back into the workshop and sank onto a stool, the official notice in my hand. Ashley had done this. She knew I wouldn't have the arcane permits a city bureaucrat would demand. She had bypassed the court of public opinion and gone straight to the rulebook, using the city's own regulations as her weapon. She wasn't just trying to ruin my reputation. She was evicting me from my own history, from the one place on earth I felt connected to my father. I looked at the half-finished table on my workbench, its lines so clean and honest. My father's belief that a crooked foundation always shows in the final product felt like a bitter irony. My foundation was honest, but I was being destroyed by a crooked one. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock my phone. I called David, my voice cracking as I explained the situation. He listened patiently, letting out a heavy sigh when I finished. This is a common tactic, Lily, he said grimly. It's nasty, and it's effective. Fighting a zoning board is like fighting a glacier. It moves slowly, it's immensely powerful, and it's almost impossible to stop. He told me he would look into it, but he had to be honest. The chances of getting a variance for this kind of work in a residential garage are slim to none. Maybe it's time to start looking for a new space. His words, meant to be practical, felt like a betrayal. It meant Ashley was winning. She was pushing me out, and I was running out of ground to stand on. After David's call, I just sat there on the stool in my workshop, the cease and desist order feeling heavier than a slab of oak. His words echoed in my head, slim to none. Start looking for a new space. It was practical advice, the kind a lawyer gives to manage a client's expectations. But to me, it sounded like a surrender. It meant tearing my business out of the only home it had ever known, severing the last physical link to my father. It meant Ashley had won. I spent the next few hours in a daze, scrolling through commercial real estate listings on my phone. The prices were astronomical. Cavernous, soulless warehouses with monthly leases that cost more than I made in 3 months. They all required huge security deposits and long-term commitments. I didn't have that kind of money. I had invested everything back into the business, into better tools and quality wood. My savings account was a joke. The reality was crushing. I couldn't stay, and I couldn't afford to go. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Ashley. Heard you're having some trouble with the city, it read, followed by a winking emoji. Guess your little hobby isn't zoned for success. Maybe you should have thought of that before you stole my ideas. Rage, hot and sharp, shot through me. She wasn't even trying to hide it. She was gloating, enjoying every second of my misery. I typed and deleted a dozen furious replies before finally just turning my phone off. Engaging with her was like trying to nail smoke to a wall. It was pointless and would only leave me more frustrated. She wanted a reaction. I refused to give her one. But her text did clarify one thing. I couldn't let her win. I owed it to my father's memory, and I owed it to myself. I turned my phone back on, my hands shaking slightly, and found Andrew's email. I had to tell him. It was the most professional and most terrifying thing I could do. I drafted the email carefully, explaining that there was an unexpected issue with my workshop's zoning, but that I was actively working on a solution and would keep him updated. I didn't make excuses or blame anyone. I just stated the facts. I hit send, and my stomach immediately clenched into a tight, painful knot. I expected silence or a polite corporate email withdrawing the offer. That would be the final nail in the coffin. To my astonishment, he replied in under 10 minutes. Thank you for your transparency, Lily, his email began. Zoning disputes are a nightmare. We've dealt with them on multi-million-dollar construction projects. They're designed to be confusing and demoralizing. My eyes scanned the words, bracing for the but it never came. Instead, he wrote, "Don't let them bully you." Often these anonymous complaints are filed with malicious intent and lack real substance beyond a checklist. Have you requested a copy of the full complaint from the city? Not just the order, but the original filing document. Sometimes the language used by the complainant can be very revealing. I stared at the screen. I hadn't thought of that. Carol, the inspector, had just quoted from her clipboard. I hadn't considered that there was a physical document written by Ashley, sitting in a file somewhere downtown. Andrew's email continued. "The offer for the Oak project stands. We believe in your work. A 6-month timeline gives us some flexibility. Find a solution. We'll be here." It wasn't a promise of help, but it was something far more valuable. A vote of confidence. It was a reminder that my work, my reputation, existed outside of Ashley's toxic narrative. He saw me as a professional facing a challenge, not a hobbyist caught breaking the rules. That small shift in perspective was everything. I wasn't just a girl in her dad's garage anymore. I was the owner of the Grain Story, a business Andrew's prestigious firm wanted to hire. I had a contract to fight for. I stood up and looked around the workshop. My father's words came back to me, the ones I had thought of with such bitterness just the day before. He always said a crooked foundation shows in the final product. Ashley's entire case against me was built on a crooked foundation of lies. Maybe it was time to stop looking at my own foundation and start examining hers. Her lawsuit, her online slander, and now this anonymous complaint. They were all pieces of the same shoddy construction. My father also used to say that the strength of a structure isn't in the wood itself, but in how the pieces join together. I had been trying to stand alone. I had my lawyer, David, but I hadn't thought about my other connections. I had clients who loved my work. I had suppliers who had known my father for years. I had Andrew, a powerful architect in Chicago who believed in me. I wasn't just one piece of wood waiting to be snapped in half. I was part of a larger structure, a stronger one than I realized. A new energy surged through me. I wasn't going to look for a new workshop. Not yet. I was going to the city planning department first thing in the morning. I was going to get a copy of that complaint, and I was going to read every single crooked word Ashley had written. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm, the gray light of dawn filtering through my window. I didn't bother with coffee. My nerves were buzzing with a high-frequency current of anxiety and adrenaline. I put on the most professional clothes I owned, a pair of clean jeans and a simple black sweater, and drove downtown. The city planning department was located in a massive gray building that looked like it had been designed to crush human spirits. It was the complete opposite of my workshop, which was filled with the warm scent of wood and the promise of creation. This place smelled of old paper and indifference. I found the right counter and stood behind a red velvet rope. A woman with a tired expression and glasses perched on the end of her nose looked up from her computer, not with a smile, but with a sigh. Her name tag read, Betty. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice flat. I explained that I needed a copy of a recent zoning complaint filed against my property. She pushed a form across the counter. "Fill this out. Property address, date of the notice, your name. There's a $10 fee for the copy." I filled out the form with a trembling hand and gave it to her along with a crumpled $10 bill. She took it without a word and disappeared into a back room filled with towering shelves of manila folders. The wait felt like an eternity. I watched people come and go, all of them looking as lost and stressed as I felt. They were clutching blueprints, permits, and notices of their own. We were all here for the same reason: to plead our case to a faceless system. David's words about fighting a glacier came back to me. I could feel the immense cold weight of it all around me. After what felt like an hour, Betty returned, holding a single folder. She opened it, pulled out a few sheets of paper, and made a copy. She stamped it, stapled the pages together, and slid them across the counter. "Here you go," she said, already turning her attention back to her screen. I took the papers and found a hard plastic chair in the corner of the lobby. My heart was pounding against my ribs. This was it. This was Ashley's weapon, the physical proof of her betrayal. I took a deep breath and started to read. The first page was the official city form, filled with bureaucratic checkboxes and codes. But the second page was a handwritten addendum under the section titled Detailed Description of Complaint. My breath caught in my throat. I knew that handwriting. The way she looped her I's and crossed her T's with a dramatic flourish. It was Ashley's. She hadn't even bothered to disguise it. Her arrogance was staggering. The complaint was a laundry list of supposed violations. She listed every major tool I owned, from my Powermatic table saw to the Festool sander I'd saved for a year to buy. How would a concerned neighbor know the specific brands of my equipment? She claimed I created deafening industrial noise at all hours of the night. A blatant lie. I respected my neighbors. I never worked past 8 p.m. But then I got to the last paragraph and the words seemed to lift off the page. Ashley had written, "This supposed business is nothing more than a hobby that got out of hand, built on ideas she stole from me after my trip to Europe. She is operating a full-scale factory without regard for safety, neighborhood peace, or the fact that her success is based on intellectual property theft." I read the sentence again, and then a third time. A cold, clear fury washed over me, replacing all the anxiety. She had done it. She had actually put it in writing. On an official document submitted to the city, she had explicitly linked her zoning complaint to her failed lawsuit. This wasn't an anonymous tip from a worried citizen. It was a documented, signed act of retaliation. My hands were steady now. I pulled out my phone and called David. "I've got it," I said, my voice low and controlled. "I have the complaint." "And?" he asked, his tone still cautious. "And you're not going to believe this. She wrote it herself, and she connected it to the lawsuit." I read him the sentence, word for word. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. For a moment, I thought the call had dropped. Then I heard him let out a low whistle. "Oh, Ashley," he murmured. "You foolish, foolish woman." The pessimism in his voice was gone, replaced by the sharp, focused energy of a predator that had just caught the scent of its prey. "Lily, this changes everything," he said, and I could practically hear him smiling. "This is no longer a simple zoning dispute. This is evidence. It's proof of malicious intent. She's using a city department as a tool for personal harassment. We can get this entire thing thrown out. In fact, we might have grounds for a countersuit for harassment and abuse of process." I looked down at the photocopied pages in my lap. Just an hour ago, this piece of paper had felt like a death sentence. Now, it was my sword and my shield. My father was right. A crooked foundation always shows in the final product. Ashley had built her case on a foundation of lies and jealousy, and in her haste to destroy me, she had left a crack big enough to bring the whole structure down. I thanked David and ended the call. I stood up, walked out of the gray, soulless building, and stepped into the sunlight. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. The fight wasn't over, but the ground had shifted, and now I was the one standing on solid rock. The drive to David's office was different. I wasn't crawling through traffic with a knot of dread in my stomach. I was moving with purpose, my hands steady on the steering wheel of my old truck. The city, which had felt so oppressive and gray that morning, now seemed vibrant. I saw details I hadn't noticed before. The intricate stonework on an old bank, the bright yellow of a woman's scarf against the concrete. The world hadn't changed, but I had. I was no longer a victim reacting to Ashley's attacks. I was a player in the game, and I had just been dealt a winning hand. David's office was in a modest building, a stark contrast to the glass and steel towers that housed the lawyers Ashley had hired. His space was cluttered with books and legal files, smelling of coffee and paper. When I walked in, he was standing by his window, but he turned immediately, a sharp, intense look on his face that I hadn't seen before. The weary pessimism was gone. "Let me see it," he said, skipping the pleasantries. I handed him the stapled pages. He took them and spread them out on his large wooden desk, his finger tracing the lines of Ashley's handwriting as he read. He was silent for a full minute, his expression unreadable. Then a slow smile spread across his face. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a hunter. "She handed us the axe," he said, looking up at me. "And then she placed her own neck on the chopping block. Intellectual property theft. She actually used the legal term from her own frivolous lawsuit in a complaint to a completely separate municipal body." He shook his head in disbelief. "This isn't just a smoking gun, Lily. This is a signed confession. He leaned back in his chair, tapping the paper. Here's what we're going to do. First, I'm drafting a motion to dismiss the zoning complaint with prejudice. That means she can't just refile it next week. We'll attach this document as Exhibit A. We'll argue that the complaint was filed in bad faith, as a form of harassment directly related to ongoing civil litigation. I listened, absorbing his words. It felt good to have a plan, to be on the offensive. What about the lawsuit? I asked. The one for the stolen ideas? David's smile widened. That's the beauty of it. This document taints her credibility in that case as well. It shows a pattern of malicious behavior. She's not a concerned party seeking justice. She's using every tool she can find, including city resources, to bully you. No judge looks kindly on that. He picked up his phone. I'm going to call her lawyer, a guy named Ronald. I imagine he doesn't know his client was foolish enough to do this. He's about to have a very bad day. I left his office an hour later with a clear path forward. The weight on my shoulders felt lighter. On the drive home, my phone buzzed. It was Ashley. I stared at her name on the screen, my thumb hovering over the answer button. A part of me, the old part, wanted to answer, to hear her out, to maybe find a sliver of the sister I once knew. But the new part of me, the one forged in the last few weeks, knew better. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. A few seconds later, a text message appeared. You need to call me. Your lawyer is insane. Another one followed immediately. What did you do? And a third. You'll regret this, Lily. The messages were frantic, riddled with typos. The cool, calculated arrogance was gone, replaced by raw panic. She was losing control, and she knew it. I pulled my truck over to the side of the road, not because I was upset, but because I was suddenly overwhelmed with a strange sense of clarity. My father always said the strength of a structure isn't in the wood itself, but in how the pieces join together. Ashley and I were once part of the same structure, a family, but she had systematically sawed through every joint, every connection, until we were just two separate pieces of wood. And she had built her new life on a foundation of lies, while I had built mine on the solid foundation my father left me. I didn't reply to her texts. I just put the phone down and started driving again, heading back to my workshop. When I walked in, the familiar smell of cedar and sawdust filled my lungs. It smelled like home. It smelled like strength. I looked at the half-finished table for Andrew's project, its beautiful oak grain waiting patiently. The stop work order was still taped to the door, a flimsy piece of paper that no longer held any power over me. I walked over, tore it down, crumpled it into a ball, and threw it into the trash. The fight wasn't over, but the tide had turned. Ashley had tried to burn my world down, but she'd only succeeded in showing me just how fireproof my foundation really was. I picked up my sander, the tool I'd bought with my father's legacy, and got back to work. The sound of it humming to life was the sound of my own resilience. The next 2 days were a blur of focused work. The hum of the sander was a meditation, the scent of oak a balm to my frayed nerves. I was finishing the tabletop for Andrew, my hands moving with a certainty that had been missing for weeks. I was a builder. I took broken, discarded things and gave them new life. Ashley was a demolisher. She took things that were whole and tried to break them. For the first time, I didn't feel sadness about that, only a quiet, firm resolve. She would not break me. She never even saw my workshop, but suddenly my little tables were a success. What would you do if your sister tried to steal your life's work? Comment below and share. My phone rang on the third afternoon. It was David. I shut off the belt sander and answered, wiping sawdust from my cheek. Any news on the motion to dismiss? I asked, getting straight to the point. I could hear the smile in his voice. The judge granted it this morning, with prejudice. The zoning complaint is officially dead and buried, Lily. She can never file it again. A wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled my knees washed over me. I leaned against the half-finished table for support. One battle was won. That's not all, David continued, his tone shifting from celebratory to strategic. I had a very interesting conversation with Ronald yesterday. He was apologetic. It seems his client failed to mention her little handwritten addendum. He was furious, but not at us. He's smart enough to know when he's been dealt a losing hand. David paused for effect. Ashley is scared. They're offering to settle the intellectual property lawsuit. I straightened up, my knuckles white on the edge of the oak table. Settle? What are the terms? They're offering to drop the suit if you agree to pay her $10,000 for her initial conceptual contributions and sign a non-disclosure agreement. I burst out laughing. It wasn't a happy sound. It was sharp and incredulous. $10,000? After she tried to ruin my business, my reputation? After she put me through hell for months? It's an admission of defeat, Lily, David said calmly. They know they have no case. They just want to walk away with something, anything to save face. No, I said, my voice cold and clear. Absolutely not. Tell Ronald we're not settling. We're going to court. I want this to go to a full discovery. I want to see her deposition. I want her to sit in a room under oath and try to explain what ideas she thinks she gave me. There was a silence on the line, and then David said, I was hoping you'd say that. As I hung up, I felt a grim satisfaction. Ashley thought she could just throw a little money at the problem and make it disappear. She didn't understand. It was never about the money. It was about the truth. I remembered my father, a man who believed in straight lines and true joints, always told me, a crooked foundation always shows in the final product. Ashley's entire case was built on a foundation of lies, and I was going to watch it crumble, brick by brick. I thought that would be the end of it for the day, but an hour later, I heard a car pull up outside. It wasn't a delivery truck. Through the dusty window of the garage door, I saw a sleek, black convertible I didn't recognize. The door opened, and Ashley stepped out. My stomach twisted into a knot. She had never come here before. Not once. She walked towards the workshop, her expensive heels crunching on the gravel driveway, looking completely out of place. I met her at the open garage door, blocking the entrance. I crossed my arms, my work apron still covered in a fine layer of sawdust. What do you want, Ashley? I asked. She tried for a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were wide with a panic she was trying desperately to conceal. Lily, we need to talk, she said, her voice strained. Your lawyer is out of control. This has all gone too far. Has it? I asked, my voice flat. It seems to me it's gone exactly as far as you pushed it. She took a step closer, lowering her voice into a conspiratorial whisper, as if we were still sisters sharing a secret. Look, I'll drop the whole thing. The lawsuit, everything. Let's just make this go away. No money, no NDA. We can just go back to how things were. Back to how things were? I repeated the words, letting them hang in the air between us. You mean back to you pretending my life's work was a cute hobby until it became successful, and then deciding you owned it? Back to you trying to destroy everything I've built? There is no going back, Ashley. Her face hardened. The fake pleasantness evaporated. You're being so dramatic. It was just a business disagreement. A business disagreement? I stepped back into the workshop, picked up the crumpled copy of the zoning complaint from my workbench, and held it out to her. Is this a business disagreement? This is your handwriting, Ashley. Intellectual property theft. You tried to use the city to shut me down as revenge because your ridiculous lawsuit was failing. You signed your name to a lie. Her eyes darted to the paper, and for a second, a flicker of genuine shame crossed her face. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a wave of pure, unfiltered rage. Her mask was off. You don't deserve this, she spat, gesturing wildly at my workshop, at the tools, at the beautiful wood. Dad loved you more. He spent all his time in the stupid garage with you teaching you things. He should have taught me. This should have been mine. The confession, raw and jealous, finally came pouring out. It was never about ideas. It was about a perceived injustice from childhood, a wound she had let fester for decades. He would have taught you, I said softly, the anger draining out of me, replaced by a profound, weary sadness. All you ever had to do was ask, but you were never interested. Not until other people told you it was valuable. She just stared at me, her chest heaving. The truth had left her speechless. I thought for a moment she might break down, that some piece of the sister I knew was still in there. I was wrong. She took a deep breath, her expression twisting into something cold and ugly. "You think you've won?" she whispered, her voice dangerously low. "This isn't over. You have no idea what I'm capable of." She turned on her heel, her footsteps sharp on the gravel as she walked back to her car, leaving her threat hanging in the air like the smell of poison. The fight wasn't over. It had just entered a new, more dangerous phase. I slept poorly for the next few nights. Ashley's threat echoed in the quiet of my small apartment, a venomous whisper that coiled around my thoughts. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding, half expecting to find her standing over my bed. During the day, I threw myself into my work with a frantic energy, trying to drown out the fear with the roar of the sander and the scent of fresh-cut pine. I finished Andrew's table, the oak top gleaming under layers of protective oil, its surface as smooth as glass. I even started sketching designs for a new line of bookshelves. Work was my sanctuary, the one place where I felt in control. The attack, when it came, wasn't with a hammer or a match. It was with something far more insidious, a perfectly curated story. It was a Thursday morning. I was taking a coffee break, scrolling through my phone when a message from a friend popped up. It was a link to a popular online lifestyle blog, one with millions of readers. The message just said, "Oh my God, Lily. I am so sorry." My blood ran cold. I clicked the link. The headline was plastered across the top of the page in a soft, elegant font. "The Hidden Story: How One Woman's Creative Vision Was Stolen by Her Own Sister." And underneath it, a professionally shot photo of Ashley. She was sitting in a chic cafe, looking thoughtful and sad, a single tear tracing a perfect path down her cheek. The article was a masterpiece of manipulation. It painted Ashley as a quiet, unsung genius, a visionary who had spent years developing a unique concept for furniture that told a story. It claimed she had shared her portfolio of ideas with me, her beloved sister, in confidence, only to have me steal them and build a business behind her back. She used details from our childhood, twisting them into weapons. She talked about how I used to copy her drawings. She mentioned a birdhouse I built for a school project, claiming she had designed it. Lie after lie, woven together with just enough truth to sound plausible to a stranger. The comment section was a tidal wave of sympathy for Ashley and vitriol for me. "What a monster," one person wrote. "I hope she gets what she deserves." Another said, "I'm canceling my order from the grain story right now. I can't support a thief." I felt the air leave my lungs. It was a public execution. She wasn't just trying to win a lawsuit anymore. She was trying to erase me, to rewrite history and paint me as the villain in her tragic tale. I stared at the picture of her, at that single, perfect, fake tear. My father's voice echoed in my head, as clear as if he were standing next to me. A crooked foundation always shows in the final product. This article, this entire performance, was Ashley's final product. And it was built on a foundation of such profound jealousy and deceit that it was already beginning to crack under its own weight. My hands were shaking as I dialed David's number. I read him excerpts from the article, my voice cracking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. He was quiet for a long moment after I finished. "This is libel, Lily. It's textbook defamation," he said, his voice grim. "The problem is, proving it is a long, expensive, and very public fight. It's exactly what she wants. She wants to drag you through the mud, force you to spend all your resources defending your name instead of running your business." He was right. It was a brilliant, cruel strategy. While I was focused on the legal chess match, she had just firebombed the entire town square. "So what do?" I asked, feeling a wave of helplessness wash over me. "For now, nothing," David advised. "Don't respond. Don't post anything online. Let her show her hand. We stick to the legal plan. Discovery is in 2 weeks. She can't hide from a deposition." Just as we were about to hang up, my workshop phone rang. I saw the caller ID and my stomach dropped. It was Francis, a wealthy client from San Francisco who had commissioned a 12-person dining table, my biggest order to date. I let the call go to voicemail, my heart hammering against my ribs. A minute later, my phone buzzed with the voicemail notification. I took a deep breath and played it. "Hello, Lily, this is Frances." Her voice was hesitant, laced with concern. I saw an article online this morning. I'm sure it's all just a misunderstanding, but my husband is a bit old-fashioned about these things. He's concerned about the allegations. Could you please give me a call back when you can? We need to discuss the status of our deposit." I clicked off the phone and leaned my head against the cool wood of a workbench. The deposit was $25,000. It was the money I was using to live, to buy materials, to pay David. Ashley knew that. This wasn't just an attack on my reputation. It was an attack on my survival. She was trying to starve me out. I closed my eyes, picturing Ashley's triumphant smile. She thought she had me cornered, that I would buckle under the pressure and give her what she wanted just to make the pain stop. But as the initial shock wore off, it was replaced by something else. A cold, hard resolve that settled deep in my bones. She had underestimated me. She had mistaken my kindness for weakness for the last time. This was no longer just a fight for my business. It was a fight for my name, my story, and my father's legacy. And I was not going to lose. The call with Frances left a metallic taste of fear in my mouth. That $25,000 deposit wasn't just money. It was the beams and posts holding up the entire structure of my life. Without it, everything would collapse. Over the next 48 hours, the article spread like a wildfire fueled by online outrage. My business email inbox became a graveyard of canceled orders. Each message was a small, polite dagger to the heart. "Due to the recent information that has come to light," one began. "We can no longer proceed with our purchase," said another. My projected income for the next quarter evaporated in less than 2 days. I felt like I was standing in my workshop watching it burn down, one perfectly crafted table leg at a time. I tried to work, but my hands felt clumsy and disconnected from my brain. Every time the saw screamed through a piece of wood, I imagined it was the sound of another person reading that article and believing it. On Saturday, I forced myself to go to the grocery store. As I stood in the checkout line, I felt the woman behind me staring. I glanced back and she quickly looked away, but not before I saw the flicker of recognition and distaste in her eyes. I abandoned my cart, full of food I suddenly couldn't stomach, and walked out, my face burning with a shame I didn't deserve. Ashley hadn't just attacked my business. She had poisoned my world. She had made me a pariah in my own life. That night, I sat in the dark, the workshop silent around me, and let myself feel the full weight of it all. The despair was a physical thing, a heavy blanket that threatened to suffocate me. But then, through the fog of misery, a different feeling began to surface. Anger. It was a clean, hot anger that burned away the tears and the fear. She had counted on me to crumble. She had always seen my quiet focus as a weakness, my passion as something quaint and unserious. She had no idea what it took to build something from nothing, the sheer grit required to turn splinters and sawdust into a life. She had no idea who I really was. I spent the entire next week with David. His office became my second home. We didn't talk about the article or the canceled orders. We talked about facts. We gathered every piece of paper that told the real story of the grain story. Bank statements showing the insurance payout and my initial investment. Receipts for my first big tool purchases. Early emails with suppliers. My original hand-drawn sketches from years ago, dated and signed. We even found the application for my first craft fair, dated 3 years before Ashley's supposed portfolio of ideas ever came up. David laid it all out on his massive conference table. It was a timeline of my life, a mountain of evidence that was irrefutable. "This is what we have," he said, tapping a thick binder. "And this is what she has, a story." In a courtroom, stories lose to facts every single time. Her lawyer knows this. He explained that the deposition was our chance to get her story on the record, under oath. Her lawyer, a guy named Roger, will try to keep her on a tight leash. But Ashley is arrogant. She believes her own lies. And people like that, they love to talk. We're just going to let her. The day before the deposition, a certified letter arrived at the workshop. It was from Frances's husband's lawyer. It was a formal demand for the immediate return of their deposit, citing a moral turpitude clause in their commission agreement. It was a ridiculous, trumped-up claim, but the message was clear. They were siding with Ashley. I forwarded it to David, my hands shaking again. His reply came back in minutes. Ignore it. It's a scare tactic. Let's focus on tomorrow. This is where it all turns around, Lily. I promise. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my workbench, running my hand over the smooth, cool surface of a half-finished rocking chair. I thought about my father, about the calluses on his hands and the quiet pride in his eyes when he taught me how to use a dovetail jig. This workshop was his legacy. My work was his legacy. Ashley was trying to steal that, to warp it into something ugly and false. As the first light of dawn filtered through the dusty windows, I stood up. The fear was gone, replaced by a calm, cold certainty. Ashley thought this was a performance, a drama she could direct. She was about to find out it wasn't a play. It was a reckoning, and I was ready. The deposition was held in a soulless conference room on the 12th floor of a downtown skyscraper. The view was of other glass and steel buildings, a cold, gray maze that felt a million miles away from the warm, organic chaos of my workshop. I sat beside David, my hands folded calmly on the polished mahogany table. The surface was so perfect, so devoid of character, it felt like an insult to the wood it came from. Across from us sat Ashley and her lawyer, Roger. Ashley was dressed in a cream-colored pantsuit, her hair perfectly styled. She looked like she was attending a charity luncheon, not a legal proceeding. She offered me a small, pitying smile, as if I were a misguided child she was reluctantly forced to discipline. Roger, a man with a perpetually worried expression and a tie that was slightly too tight, began the questioning. His strategy was clear from the start: to paint a picture of Ashley as the unsung creative force, the gentle artist whose brilliant ideas were ruthlessly exploited by her ungrateful blue-collar sister. He had her describe long, fictitious afternoons spent sketching designs on cafe napkins, of whispered conversations where she supposedly laid out the entire blueprint for my business. Ashley performed beautifully. She spoke in a soft, wistful voice, occasionally dabbing at a dry eye with a tissue. She was a great storyteller. I had to give her that. I just sat there listening to the story of a life I had never lived, of a partnership that never existed. David let her talk, his face an unreadable mask of professional calm. After nearly an hour of this performance, it was David's turn. He didn't start with accusations. He didn't even mention the furniture. He started with a single piece of paper, sliding it across the table. "Ms. Ashley," he said, his voice even and polite, "this is a bank statement from your account, dated October 2018. Could you confirm that on the 15th of that month you received a wire transfer for $50,000 from your late father's life insurance policy?" Ashley glanced at the paper. "Yes, that's correct." "And what did you do with that money?" David asked. Roger shifted in his chair. Objection. Relevance? "It's highly relevant to the origin of the business, Your Honor," David said to the court reporter. "I'll connect it." Ashley waved a dismissive hand at her lawyer. "It's fine, Roger. I have nothing to hide. I used it to travel, to find inspiration. I went to Europe to study the great artisans, to absorb the culture that would inform the designs I brought back for my sister." David nodded slowly, then slid another document across the table. "And this is my client's bank statement. It shows an identical deposit on the same day. Ms. Ashley, are you aware of what my client, your sister, did with her $50,000? "I assume she put it into her little hobby," Ashley said with a sniff. "She did," David confirmed. He then laid out a series of receipts on the table like a winning poker hand. She spent $22,000 on a commercial-grade table saw, $5,000 on a drum sander, $10,000 on a down payment for a truck, and another $13,000 on her first bulk purchase of reclaimed lumber from a barn in Ohio. These are all dated within 2 weeks of receiving her inheritance." He paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "It seems your sister wasn't waiting for your inspiration from Europe. She was building a business." Ashley's smile faltered. "Well, I had already given her the foundational ideas, the overall aesthetic." "The aesthetic?" David repeated. He pulled out a thick binder, the one we had spent a week compiling. He opened it to the first page. This is an application for a booth at the Pioneer Valley Craft Fair, filled out and signed by my client. It's dated May 2017, a year and a half before your father passed away, and long before your inspirational trip to Europe. He turned the binder around for her to see. Attached to the application were photographs of 3 pieces of furniture: a coffee table with a distinctive dovetail joint, a bookshelf, and a small end table. My first real pieces. Do you recognize these designs, Miss Ashley? She stared at the photos. I could see the moment the panic set in. Her story was a beautifully constructed house of cards, and David had just pulled out the bottom one. Those were early prototypes, based on my concepts, she stammered. Concepts you have no record of? No sketches, no notes, no emails? David pressed, his voice still quiet, but now with a sharp edge. I'm an artist, not an archivist, she snapped, her voice rising. I shared my soul with her. I didn't think I needed to get it notarized. Roger put a hand on her arm. Ashley, calm down. But it was too late. The facade had cracked. David ignored him and turned to the last page in the binder. It was a single hand-drawn sketch on yellowed graph paper. It was a rocking chair, the one I had been working on the night before. It was my father's design, one he never got to build. His signature was in the bottom right corner. And finally, David said, his voice softening, my client's business is called The Grain Story, because every piece of wood has a history and every design has a legacy. Whose legacy is this, Miss Ashley? Ashley stared at our father's handwriting. The fake tears were gone, replaced by a flush of genuine cornered rage. She looked from the drawing to me, and in her eyes I saw not a sister, but a stranger. A stranger consumed by a jealousy so deep it had poisoned everything. Roger saw it too. He abruptly stood up. We're taking a 5-minute recess, he announced, his voice tight with frustration, as he practically pulled a seething Ashley out of her chair and toward the door. As they left, my father's words echoed in my mind. A crooked foundation always shows in the final product. I was watching Ashley's final product crumble into dust right before my eyes. The 5 minutes felt like an hour. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded on the polished table. David gave my arm a gentle squeeze under the table, a silent gesture of support. I didn't look at him. My eyes were fixed on the door, on the spot where my sister had disappeared. The air in the room was thick with the ghost of her anger. I could still feel the heat of it, the bitter sting of her final glare. I wondered what was being said in that hallway. Was Roger explaining the legal concept of no evidence? Was he telling her that a lawsuit, like a piece of furniture, needs more than just a flimsy idea to stand on? When the door finally opened, it was Roger who entered first. His face was a mask of professional regret. He looked like a man who had just been forced to admit his prize-winning show dog was, in fact, a stray cat in a poodle costume. He avoided eye contact with everyone, his gaze settling on a point on the wall just above David's head. Ashley followed him, her movements stiff and jerky. Her face was pale. All the manufactured outrage drained away, leaving behind something hollow and ugly. The fire in her eyes had been replaced by cold, hard resentment. Roger cleared his throat. Mr. David, he began, his voice formal and clipped. After consultation with my client, we have decided to withdraw the complaint. Effective immediately. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The receipts, the craft fair application, our father's drawing, they had said everything. We apologize for any inconvenience this may have caused. David simply nodded. Accepted. There was no triumph in his voice, only finality. I expected that to be the end. I thought we would sign a paper, stand up, and walk out of each other's lives. But Ashley wasn't done. She took a step forward, her eyes locking onto mine. You think you've won, don't you? She hissed, her voice a low whisper that was more venomous than any shout. You always had to be the good one. Daddy's little girl playing with his old tools. You stole him from me, and now you've stolen this. I didn't steal anything, Ashley, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Dad left us both the same amount of money. You chose cocktails in Paris. I chose a table saw in a dusty garage. We both built something with our inheritance. You built a collection of photographs. I built a business. Don't be angry with me because you don't like what you built. Her lip curled into a sneer. You know nothing about art or inspiration. No, I agreed softly. I don't know much about the kind of inspiration that only shows up when there's a six-figure bank account attached to it. The inspiration I know smells like wood stain and sweat. It leaves splinters in your hands and sawdust in your hair. I stood up, my chair scraping softly against the floor. I looked at the sister, who was now a stranger, her face twisted by a jealousy I would never understand. The lawsuit is over, Ashley. We're done. Roger quickly stepped between us, putting a hand on her shoulder. Ashley, let's go. For once, she listened, letting him guide her out of the room without another word, without a backward glance. That evening, I didn't celebrate. I didn't call friends or open a bottle of wine. I went back to my workshop, the one place on earth that felt truly mine. The familiar scent of cedar and pine wrapped around me like a hug. I walked over to my workbench, my fingers tracing the grain of a half-finished tabletop. My gaze fell upon the yellowed graph paper I had brought back from the meeting, my father's sketch of the rocking chair. I picked it up, my thumb brushing over his familiar looping signature. This was the legacy he had left me. Not just the tools or the money, but the knowledge that true value is built, not claimed. It's earned through calloused hands and long nights, through trial and error, through the patience to turn a rough piece of wood into something beautiful and strong. My sister had tried to build her case on lies, on a story with no substance. And just as my father had always said, a crooked foundation always shows in the final product. Her story had crumbled. I pinned the sketch to the wall above my workbench. Then I walked over to the rack of reclaimed lumber, the very wood I had bought with my share of the inheritance. I pulled out a long, sturdy plank of oak, its grain telling a story of 100 years standing strong against the wind and rain. I heaved it onto the saw table. The lawsuit was over. The noise was gone. Now there was only the work. It was time to build my father's chair. It was time to continue telling the story. My story, one piece of wood at a time. From my father's garage to a courtroom battle, I defended my creations. Now the noise is gone, and it's time to build his chair. What did you think of my fight for legacy? Subscribe for more stories.